Imagine for a second that you are 17 years old. It's Christmas Eve, 1971, and you are sitting in a window seat of a Lockheed L-188 Electra turboprop aircraft cruising at 21,000 feet over the Peruvian Andes. You are holding your mother's hand. You're eating a sandwich. You're thinking about your dad waiting for you at home, about the presents in your luggage, about your high school graduation dance that you just attended the night before. Suddenly, the world turns white. A bolt of lightning strikes the right wing of the plane. It doesn't just damage the aircraft, it tears it apart. The plane disintegrates in midair. The noise of the engines is instantly replaced by the roar of the wind. You are ripped out of the fuselage, still strapped into your row of 3 seats. You are spinning, tumbling, falling 2 miles through the open air, straight down into the heart of the Amazon rainforest. By every law of physics, by every statistic in the book, you should be dead before you even hit the canopy. But you aren't. You wake up the next morning. You are the only one. 91 people are gone. You are alone in the green hell with a broken collarbone, 1 shoe, and a bag of candy. This isn't a movie script. This is the nightmare true story of Juliane Koepcke, the girl who fell from the sky. To really understand how anyone survives a 2-mile free fall, we have to talk about who this girl was, because Juliane Koepcke wasn't your average teenager. If you or I fell into the Amazon, we probably wouldn't last 24 hours. But Juliane had an edge. She was born in Lima to German expatriates, and her parents, Hans Wilhelm and Maria Koepcke, were world-renowned zoologists. While other kids were playing in city parks or learning to ride bikes on pavement, Juliane grew up at a research station called Panguana, deep in the rainforest. She didn't just visit the jungle, she lived it. She knew the sounds. She knew that the river was a highway, not a barrier. She knew which spiders would kill you and which ones would just hurt. She had what locals called jungle eyes, and in a few hours, that specific, unique upbringing was going to be the only thing standing between her and a gruesome, lonely death. It all started with a desire to be home for the holidays. Juliane and her mother, Maria, were at the Lima airport, desperate to get back to Panguana to celebrate Christmas with Juliane's father. But it was the holiday rush, and flights were fully booked. The only thing they could find was a flight with an airline called Lanza. Now, you have to understand the reputation of this airline. The locals in Peru had a dark joke about it. They said Lanza la danza, Lanza the dance, because of how violently these planes shook in the air. The airline had a terrible safety record. They'd already lost 2 planes in recent years. Juliane's father had actually begged his wife not to fly with this airline. He urged them to wait, but they wanted to be home. We've all been there, right? You ignore the red flag because you want the reward. You think, it's just a short flight. What could go wrong? So, on December 24th, they boarded Lanza Flight 508. The flight was scheduled to be short, just under an hour. They took off and everything was fine. They climbed over the Andes Mountains and the views were spectacular. Juliane was sitting in row 19 by the window. Her mother was beside her. It was a normal flight. But then they hit the storm front. This wasn't just rain. This was a tropical thunderstorm of biblical proportions. The sky turned pitch black in the middle of the day. The turbulence became so violent that the overhead bins popped open, raining luggage and Christmas presents down on the passengers. People started screaming. Juliane looked at her mother. Maria was a calm woman, an experienced traveler, but her eyes were wide. She said simply, "I don't like this." The pilot made a fatal error that day. Instead of flying around the storm or turning back, he tried to punch through it. At 12:36 p.m. at 21,000 feet, the lightning struck. Juliane saw a blinding white light on the right wing. She heard her mother say the last words she would ever speak. "That is the end. It's all over." The plane pitched into a nosedive. The structural stress was too much for the Electra. The wings sheared off. The fuselage snapped. The cabin broke apart. Juliane later described the sensation not as falling, but as being suspended. The plane vanished from around her. She was alone in the sky. She was spinning, looking down at the jungle below, which she said looked like heads of broccoli. She was conscious for the fall. She watched the earth rushing up to meet her. And then everything went black. When Juliane opened her eyes, it was the next morning. It was pouring rain. She was lying underneath her row of seats. Let's do a quick body scan of her condition. She had a massive concussion. Her eyes were swollen almost completely shut. She had deep gashes on her arms and legs. Her collarbone was snapped, but she was alive. She unbuckled herself from the seat. She stood up, and the first thing she did was yell for her mother. She screamed, "Mama!" over and over again. But the Amazon absorbs sound. There was no answer, just the buzzing of cicadas and the relentless drip of rain. She looked around the crash site. There was no fuselage, no fire, just debris scattered through the trees. She found a small bag of sweets, panettone candy scattered in the mud. That was her only food. She had lost one sandal in the fall. Her glasses, which were crucial because she was extremely nearsighted, were gone. The world was a blur of green and gray. Most people in the situation would stay put. That's the standard advice, isn't it? Wait for rescue. Stay by the wreckage. But Juliane heard the search planes overhead. She looked up, but she couldn't see them through the thick canopy of trees. The jungle was too dense, and she realized a terrifying truth. If she couldn't see them, they definitely couldn't see her. If she stayed there, she would die there. She remembered a piece of advice her father had taught her years ago. If you get lost in the jungle, find a stream. Follow the stream to a river. Rivers lead to people. So wearing one sandal, she turned her back on the crash site and started to walk. Days passed. The adrenaline faded and the true horror of the Amazon set in. This is not the jungle you see in cartoons. It is a hostile, living organism that is trying to consume you. The heat was suffocating. The humidity was nearly 100%. Because she's lost her glasses, she had to test the ground with her one shoe to avoid stepping on snakes. Every step was a gamble. Then she heard a sound that chilled her to the bone. The call of the king vulture. She knew that sound from her time at the research station. King vultures only land where there is carrion, where there are dead bodies. On the fourth day, she found them. A row of seats, just like hers, rammed headfirst into the ground. It was 3 passengers. They were still strapped in. The impact had been so violent that they were buried 3 feet deep into the earth, with only their legs sticking up. It was a gruesome sight. Juliane checked them, hoping against hope that one might be alive, or that one might be her mother. They weren't. One of them was a woman, but when Juliane touched her arm, she knew it wasn't Maria. She grabbed a small bag of candy from the wreckage and kept moving. She had to keep moving. By day 6, the situation was critical. The stream had turned into a larger river. She was swimming more than walking now, like letting the current take her. This was incredibly dangerous. Caimans and piranhas infested these waters, but she knew that piranhas typically attack in shallow water, so she made the calculated decision to float in the middle, in the deep water, drifting past the giant river reptiles. But something worse than piranhas was happening to her body. She had a deep gash on her arm from the crash. In the tropical heat, flies had laid eggs in the wound. You know where this is going. The eggs hatched. Maggots. She could feel them moving inside her arm. They were eating her alive. She started hallucinating from hunger and infection. She saw buildings on the riverbank that weren't there. She heard voices calling her name that weren't real. The nights were the worst torture. In the Amazon, despite the heat of the day, the temperature dropped significantly at night. Juliane was wearing a torn, sleeveless mini dress. That's it. She froze every single night, shivering in the mud covered in mosquitoes, listening to the jaguar calls in the distance. She was fading. She stopped hearing the search planes. They had given up. On the 10th day, Juliane was barely conscious. She was drifting along the riverbank, her body giving out. She saw something massive in the water. She assumed it was another hallucination, a cruel trick of her mind. She reached out and touched it. It felt like wood. It was a boat. A boat means people. She looked up the muddy bank and saw a small shack. It was a shelter used by lumbermen, but no one was there. She crawled up the bank on her hands and knees. It took her hours to move just a few yards. Inside the shack, she found a can of gasoline. Now, remember the maggots? Juliane remembered seeing her father treat a dog for a worm infection using kerosene. She didn't have kerosene, but she had gasoline. This is one of the most hardcore moments of survival I've ever heard of. She took the gasoline and poured it directly into the open, infected wound on her arm. The pain was blinding. It was agonizing, But as the gas hit the wound, the maggots tried to escape the fumes. She pulled them out one by one. She counted them. 35 maggots. She collapsed on the floor of the hut. She waited. This was the end of the line. If no one came back to this boat, she would die right there, inches from salvation. The next morning, day 11, Juliane heard voices. Human voices. She thought she was dreaming again. But then 3 men walked out of the forest. These were Peruvian lumbermen. Now, imagine what they saw. White girl, gaunt, skeletal, covered in mud, eyes swollen, bloodshot, bruises everywhere, appearing out of nowhere in the deep jungle. At first, they were terrified. They stayed back. Local legend spoke of a water spirit, a pale ghost that lures men to their doom. They thought she was a demon. Juliane summoned her last bit of strength. She spoke to them in perfect Spanish. She said, "I'm a girl who was in the Lanza crash. My name is Juliane." The fear left their faces. They rushed to her. They gave her food. They cleaned her wounds. They treated her like a daughter. They took her downriver in their boat to a station, where she was airlifted to a hospital in Pucallpa. The reunion with her father was heartbreaking. He had been searching for days, believing both his wife and daughter were dead. When he saw Juliane, they just held each other. No words were needed. But the tragedy wasn't over. Juliane's survival gave the search teams a location. They triangulated her path and found the crash site. They found the bodies. They found Juliane's mother. And here is the most crushing part of the story. The autopsy revealed that Maria Koepcke didn't die in the crash. Like Juliane, she survived the fall. She wasn't ejected. She stayed in the fuselage, but she was badly injured. She couldn't move. She died days later, alone in the jungle, while her daughter was fighting her way down the river just a few miles away. Juliane Koepcke is the sole survivor of Lanza Flight 508. She went on to study biology, just like her parents. She returned to Panguana. She dedicated her life to protecting the very rainforest that killed her mother and almost killed her. She has said in interviews that the jungle was her prison, but also her savior. The canopy broke her fall. The water guided her home. It's easy to call it a miracle. But was it? A miracle didn't tell her to follow the water. A miracle didn't tell her to swim in the deep current to avoid piranhas. A miracle didn't tell her how to clean her wounds with gasoline. Juliane survived because she listened. She paid attention to the world around her. She survived because she refused to give up when the entire world had literally fallen apart around her. So, I have to ask you, if you fell 2 miles from the sky and woke up alone in the Amazon, would you have stayed by the plane like you were supposed to? Or would you have walked into the green hell? Let me know what you think you'd do in the comments below. And if you're flying soon, maybe check the weather report. I'll see you in the next one.